What would you say if I told you that the most advanced sniper techniques used by the United States military today were not invented in some high-tech laboratory or elite training facility? What would you think if I showed you classified documents proving that these techniques came from men who had never seen a rifle until they were teenagers? Men who learned to shoot by applying hunting methods that were already ancient when Columbus first set foot in the Americas. And what would you do if you discovered that the government spent decades trying to understand how these warriors could hit targets that trained army marksmen could not even see, only to bury the research when they realized they could never replicate what the Navajo had done? Before we go any further, I need you to do something. Drop a comment right now telling me where you are watching from, what city, what state, what part of the world. And if you have ever wondered why certain military secrets remain classified for generations, if you have ever suspected that there is knowledge out there that powerful people do not want you to have, then hit that subscribe button. This channel exists to unearth the truths that have been deliberately buried. Help us keep digging. Now let me take you back to the summer of 1942, back to a rifle range in the Arizona desert, where a group of army officers stood in stunned silence, watching something that should have been impossible. Back to the moment when a young Navajo man named Chester Begay picked up a standard-issue M1903 Springfield rifle for the first time in his life, and did something that would change the history of American warfare forever. The rifle range at Fort Defiance was nothing special. A few wooden targets set up at various distances, a handful of sandbag positions, a small observation tower where officers could watch the recruits and evaluate their potential. It was the same setup used at dozens of training facilities across the country, designed to identify soldiers who might be suitable for advanced marksmanship training. The recruits that day were Navajo volunteers, young men from the reservation who had answered the call to serve their country despite having every reason to refuse. Their grandparents had been forced on the long walk. Their parents had been sent to boarding schools where speaking their own language was punished with beatings. Their people had been systematically stripped of their land, their culture, their dignity. And yet, here they were, willing to fight and die for the nation that had done all of this to them. Major Harold Richardson was the officer in charge of the evaluation. He was a career army man, a veteran of the First World War, a practical soldier who had seen enough combat to know that bravery without skill was just a faster way to die. He had been skeptical when he received orders to evaluate the Navajo recruits for a special program. He had heard the rumors about their tracking abilities, their endurance, their supposed mystical connection to the land. He dismissed most of it as romantic nonsense. What he witnessed that morning changed his mind forever. The first recruit to step up to the firing line was Chester Begay. He was 23 years old, lean and quiet, with the watchful eyes of someone who had spent his life observing the world rather than talking about it. He had grown up herding sheep in the Chuska Mountains. He had never held a rifle before in his life. His only experience with weapons was the bow his grandfather had taught him to make, and the ancient hunting techniques that had been passed down through his family for generations. The range instructor, a sergeant named William Patterson, handed Begay the Springfield and gave him a brief overview of how it worked. Load here, aim there, squeeze the trigger, do not pull it. Standard instructions, the same ones given to every recruit who had ever passed through that range. Begay listened without expression. Then he did something that made Patterson think he had not understood a word. He closed his eyes. He stood there at the firing line, rifle in his hands, eyes closed for almost 30 seconds. Patterson was about to repeat the instructions when Bigay suddenly opened his eyes, raised the rifle to his shoulder, and fired 5 shots in rapid succession. Every shot hit the center of the target. Perfect grouping, perfect accuracy. On his first attempt, with a weapon he had never touched before, Chester Bigay had shot better than most soldiers achieved after months of training. Patterson checked the target himself, certain there had been some mistake. There was no mistake. 5 holes, clustered so tightly they could be covered with a silver dollar, dead center of the bullseye. Major Richardson walked down from the observation tower. He approached Bigay and asked the question that would launch one of the most secret research programs in American military history. "How did you do that?" Bigay looked at him with those quiet, watchful eyes. "I listened to the rifle," he said. "It told me where it wanted to shoot. I just helped it get there." Richardson did not understand. He asked Bigay to explain further. Bigay was silent for a moment, searching for words in a language that was not his own. "When I was a boy," he said finally, "my grandfather taught me to hunt. He said that every weapon has a spirit. The bow wants to send the arrow to its target. The hunter's job is not to force it, but to remove the obstacles. To become so still, so empty, that there is nothing between the weapon and the prey." He gestured toward the rifle. "This weapon is the same. It has a spirit. It knows where it wants to send the bullet. When I closed my eyes, I was listening for that knowledge. I was removing myself from the path. When I opened my eyes, I was not aiming. I was following." Patterson thought it was nonsense. Richardson was not so sure. He had seen too many strange things in his years of service to dismiss anything out of hand, and he had just watched an untrained recruit outshoot his best marksman with a weapon he had never held before. He ordered the evaluation to continue. Over the next 3 hours, 27 Navajo recruits stepped up to the firing line. Some had experience with rifles from hunting on the reservation. Some, like Bigay, had never touched one before. But the results were remarkably consistent. Every single recruit demonstrated accuracy that exceeded Army standards. Many of them matched or surpassed Bigay's performance. And several of them did things that Richardson would later describe in his classified report as beyond the boundaries of known marksmanship. One recruit, a 19-year-old named Thomas Yellowhair, hit a target at 800 yards on his 3rd shot. The first 2 shots had been deliberate misses, he explained afterward. He was introducing himself to the rifle. He was letting it learn his hands, his breath, his heartbeat. By the 3rd shot, they were working together. Another recruit, Samuel Nez, demonstrated an ability to compensate for wind conditions that should have required instruments to measure. He could not explain how he knew the wind would shift. He simply knew. He felt it in his body the way a sailor feels the changing of the tide. The wind spoke to him, he said. It told him where it was going before it got there. A 3rd recruit, James Benally, showed something even more disturbing. He could hit targets he could not see. During one test, a target was placed behind a small ridge, completely invisible from the firing position. Benally closed his eyes, stood motionless for almost a minute, then raised his rifle and fired a single shot. When they checked the target, there was a hole in the exact center. "How?" Richardson demanded. Benally shrugged. "The earth remembers where things are," he said. "If you know how to ask, it will tell you." Richardson's report, filed on August 14, 1942, ran to 47 pages. It documented every test, every result, every inexplicable demonstration of marksmanship that the Navajo recruits had provided. It included detailed observations of their techniques, their breathing patterns, their unusual preparatory rituals, and it concluded with a recommendation that would shape the course of the war. "These men possess abilities that cannot be explained by conventional marksmanship training," Richardson wrote. "They appear to access information and achieve results through methods that our current understanding of physics and human perception cannot account for. I strongly recommend the immediate establishment of a research program to study these abilities and, if possible, to develop training methods that can transfer them to conventional soldiers. The recommendation was approved within a week. The program was designated Project Thunderbird, and the Navajo recruits who had demonstrated such remarkable abilities were transferred to a secret facility in the Nevada desert, where they would spend the next 3 years teaching their techniques to some of the best marksmen in the American military. What happened at that facility would remain classified for over 50 years. The Nevada facility was officially designated Training Area 17. Unofficially, the soldiers who trained there called it the Ghost Ranch. It was located approximately 60 miles northwest of Las Vegas, in a stretch of desert so remote that the nearest town was a cluster of abandoned mining shacks. The buildings were low and unremarkable, designed to be invisible from the air. The perimeter was patrolled by armed guards who had been told only that the facility was conducting advanced weapons research. Chester Begay arrived at the Ghost Ranch in September of 1942, along with 14 other Navajo marksmen who had been selected for the program. They were met by a colonel named Frederick Hollister, a former Olympic shooting champion who had been pulled out of combat duty specifically to run Project Thunderbird. Hollister was a practical man. He did not believe in mysticism or spirits, or any of the other explanations the Navajo had offered for their abilities. He believed in physics, in muscle memory, in the quantifiable factors that determined whether a bullet hit its target or missed. His job, as he understood it, was to figure out what the Navajo were really doing, strip away the superstitious nonsense, and develop a training protocol that could be taught to any soldier. He would spend the next 3 years learning how wrong he was. The first phase of the program was observation. Hollister brought in high-speed cameras, acoustic sensors, motion tracking equipment, everything the military had available to measure and analyze human performance. He filmed the Navajo from every angle as they shot. He measured their heart rates, their breathing patterns, their galvanic skin responses. He attached sensors to their rifles to detect the exact moment of trigger pull. He recorded everything. The data was baffling. The Navajo showed physiological patterns that contradicted everything known about marksmanship. Their heart rates did not elevate before shooting. Their breathing did not follow the standard patterns taught to competitive shooters. Their muscle tension decreased rather than increased at the moment of firing. It was as if they were falling asleep at the exact instant they pulled the trigger. Even more puzzling was what the high-speed cameras revealed. Standard marksmanship training teaches shooters to align the sights carefully, to place the front sight exactly on the target, to squeeze the trigger gradually while maintaining perfect sight alignment. The Navajo did none of this. Their sight alignment was loose, approximate, almost casual. They did not appear to be looking at the sights at all. They seemed to be looking through them, at something beyond the target, something the cameras could not see. Hollister demanded explanations. The Navajo tried to provide them, but the concepts did not translate easily into English. Chester Begay spent hours with Hollister attempting to describe what he experienced when he shot. He spoke of the rifle as a living thing, an extension of his body, a channel through which his intention could flow. He spoke of the target not as a distant object, but as a place he was already present, a destination he had arrived at before the bullet even left the barrel. He spoke of time slowing down, of space collapsing, of a moment of perfect unity when shooter and rifle and target became a single entity. Hollister recorded every word. He analyzed it. He tried to translate it into scientific terminology. He failed. "You are describing something that cannot exist," he told Begay in frustration after one particularly long session. "Bullets follow ballistic trajectories. They are affected by gravity, wind, air resistance. They do not care about your intentions or your unity with the target. Physics does not work the way you describe." Begay smiled. That quiet smile that Hollister had come to recognize as a sign that he was about to say something profound. "You are right," Begay said. "Physics does not work the way I describe." but shooting does. Perhaps your physics is missing something." Hollister was not convinced. He was determined to find a rational explanation for the Navajo abilities. He brought in psychologists to study their mental processes. He brought in physicists to analyze their techniques. He brought in the best marksmen in the American military to learn from them directly. The results were frustrating. The psychologists concluded that the Navajo were accessing some form of heightened perception, but they could not explain how or why. The physicists admitted that the Navajo were somehow accounting for variables that should have been impossible to perceive without instruments, but they could not identify the mechanism. The marksmen who trained with the Navajo showed modest improvement, but none of them came close to replicating the abilities they witnessed. After 6 months, Hollister was ready to give up. The Navajo techniques, whatever they were, seemed to be untransferable. They appeared to depend on something that could not be taught, something that was either innate or the product of a lifetime of cultural conditioning that could not be replicated in a military training program. And then something happened that changed everything. It was a cold night in February of 1943. A young lieutenant named David Chen had been training with the Navajo for almost 4 months. He was one of the most promising students, a natural marksman who had shown flashes of the almost supernatural accuracy that the Navajo demonstrated consistently, but he had hit a wall. No matter how hard he tried, he could not achieve the breakthrough that would elevate him to their level. That night, Chen could not sleep. He walked out into the desert, as he often did when insomnia struck, and found Chester Begay sitting on a rock, staring up at the stars. They sat together in silence for a long time. Chen had learned that the Navajo valued silence, that they did not fill empty spaces with unnecessary words. He waited for Begay to speak first. When Begay finally spoke, his voice was soft, almost lost in the desert wind. "You're trying too hard," he said. "You think the secret is something you can learn, something you can add to yourself, but it is the opposite. The secret is something you must unlearn, something you must remove." Chen asked what he meant. Begay turned to look at him. In the starlight, his eyes seemed to hold depths that Chen had never noticed before. "Your people teach you that you are separate," Begay said. "Separate from the rifle, separate from the target, separate from the earth and the wind and the spirits of all things. You believe that shooting is an act of will, of forcing your intention onto the world. But that is not how it works." He picked up a handful of sand and let it trickle through his fingers. "My people teach something different," he continued. "We teach that everything is connected. The shooter, the rifle, the bullet, the target, the wind, the earth, the sky, all one thing wearing different faces. When I shoot, I am not forcing anything. I am remembering that the separation is an illusion, remembering that the bullet is already at the target and has been since the beginning of time. My job is simply to remove the obstacles that prevent me from seeing this truth." Chen thought about this for a long time. Finally, he asked how one could remove those obstacles. Begay smiled. "You must die," he said simply. Chen felt a chill that had nothing to do with the desert cold. Begay saw his reaction and laughed softly. "Not your body," he said. "Yourself. The part of you that believes it is separate, the part that thinks it is aiming, controlling, forcing. That part must die. And when it dies, something else takes over, something that has always been there waiting. Something that knows how to shoot in ways your conscious mind cannot imagine." He stood up and stretched, looking out over the dark desert. "My grandfather called it the Old One," he said. "The part of us that is older than words, older than thought, older than the illusion of separation. Every human being has it. But your civilization has taught you to ignore it, to suppress it, to pretend it does not exist. You have become deaf to its voice." He turned back to Chen. "I cannot teach you to shoot," he said. "I can only teach you to listen, to hear the Old One speaking. And if you hear it, if you let it guide your hands, you will shoot in ways that your physics cannot explain, not because physics is wrong, but because there are things in this universe that your physics has not yet learned to measure." That night changed David Chen. He did not understand everything Begay had said. He was not sure he believed it. But something in the Navajo's words had resonated with a part of him that he had never known existed. A part that was older than his training, older than his education, older than everything he thought he knew about himself. He began to approach his training differently. Instead of trying harder, he tried less. Instead of focusing on technique, he focused on emptiness. Instead of aiming, he listened. And slowly, gradually, something began to change. It took 3 more months. 3 months of frustration, of failure, of moments when he wanted to give up and admit that whatever the Navajo had, he would never have it. But he persisted. He sat with Begay night after night, learning to hear the silence beneath the noise. He practiced a kind of meditation that had no name in English, a practice of deliberately dissolving the sense of self, of becoming so empty that there was nothing left to interfere with the shot. And then, one morning in May of 1943, it happened. Chen stepped up to the firing line. The target was 1,000 yards away, barely visible in the desert haze. The wind was gusting at 15 to 20 miles per hour, shifting direction every few seconds. By any standard calculation, hitting that target should have been impossible without correction based on instrumental measurements. Chen did not calculate. He did not estimate. He closed his eyes and felt for the Old One. It was there. It had always been there. He had simply never listened before, and now that he was listening, he could hear it clearly. A voice that was not a voice. A knowing that was not thinking. A presence that was older than his body, older than his mind, older than the human race itself. He opened his eyes. The target was no longer distant. It was here, present, immediate. The separation between himself and the target had collapsed. He was already there. He had always been there. He raised the rifle. He did not aim. He felt the rifle settle into the alignment that it wanted. The path that the bullet had been traveling since before time began. He squeezed the trigger. The bullet crossed 1,000 yards of desert in less than 2 seconds. It punched through the center of the target with an accuracy that the observers would later calculate as being within 3 millimeters of perfect center. Colonel Hollister, watching from the observation tower, did not know whether to celebrate or panic. He had spent 8 months trying to debunk the Navajo abilities. Now one of his own officers had demonstrated the same impossible skill. The secret was real, and David Chen was living proof that it could be transferred. What happened next would consume the rest of the war. It would spawn research programs that would continue for decades. It would create a cadre of elite marksmen whose abilities would remain classified long after most of them were dead. And it would eventually lead to a discovery so disturbing that the entire project would be buried under layers of secrecy that persist to this day. But before any of that could happen, the Navajo would have to face a test that would push their abilities to the absolute limit. A test that would reveal not just what they could do with a rifle, but what they could perceive about the fabric of reality itself. A test that would begin with a single question, asked by Colonel Hollister on a sweltering afternoon in July of 1943. Can you teach a man to hit a target that does not exist yet? Chester Begay looked at him for a long moment. Then he smiled. What do you mean by yet? He asked. And with those 4 words, the strangest chapter in the history of American warfare began. Colonel Hollister's question was not as absurd as it sounded. The military had been wrestling with a problem that conventional marksmanship could not solve. In the chaos of combat, targets did not stand still. They moved, they ducked, they ran for cover. By the time a sniper calculated the trajectory and squeezed the trigger, the enemy was often no longer where he had been. The best marksmen in the world were still shooting at where targets used to be, not where they would be. The Navajo had demonstrated an uncanny ability to account for variables that should have been impossible to perceive. They could compensate for wind shifts before they happened. They could hit moving targets with a precision that suggested they knew the target's path before it was traveled. Some of them, like James Benally, could hit targets they could not even see. If those abilities were real, Hollister reasoned, then perhaps they could be extended further. Perhaps a marksman could learn to perceive not just the present state of a target, but its future state. Perhaps the boundary between now and later was just another illusion that the Navajo had learned to see through. Chester Begay understood what Hollister was asking better than Hollister himself did. The colonel was using scientific language to describe something that the Navajo had known for centuries. Time was not a river flowing in one direction. It was an ocean, and those who knew how to swim could move through it in ways that the landlocked could not imagine. "I will need to speak with the others," Begay told Hollister. "This is not something one person can teach. It is something we must remember together." Hollister agreed. Whatever it took, the war was not going well. American soldiers were dying by the thousands in the Pacific and Europe. If the Navajo could provide even a small advantage, if they could train even a handful of marksmen to shoot into the future, it could save countless lives. The Navajo gathered that night in one of the barracks buildings, far from the ears of the white soldiers and scientists. 15 men sitting in a circle, speaking in their own language for the first time in months. They discussed what Hollister was asking. They debated whether it was possible, and they confronted a question that had been lurking beneath the surface of the entire project. Were they betraying their ancestors by sharing these secrets? The techniques they used were not simply skills that could be taught and forgotten. They were sacred knowledge, passed down through generations, entrusted to them by elders who had been entrusted by elders before them. The ability to see through the illusion of separation, to hear the voice of the Old One, to move through time as others move through space. These were gifts that came with responsibilities. They were not meant to be used for killing. They were meant for hunting, for survival, for maintaining the harmony between the people and the land. And yet here they were, using these gifts to train soldiers who would use them to kill other human beings. They were taking the sacred and turning it into a weapon. They were betraying everything their grandfathers had taught them. The debate went on for hours. Some argued that they had no choice. They were soldiers now. They had sworn an oath. Their people were counting on them to prove their worth, to earn the respect that had been denied them for so long. If they refused to help, they would be seen as cowards or traitors, and their people would suffer for it. Others argued that some things were more important than respect. The sacred knowledge was not theirs to give away. It belonged to the ancestors, to the unborn, to the land itself. By sharing it with the military, they were breaking a covenant that was older than their nation, older than any nation. It was Thomas Yellowhair who finally spoke the words that settled the debate. "We are already broken," he said. "Our people are already broken. The long walk broke us. The boarding schools broke us. The reservations broke us. We have been breaking for 100 years, and we will keep breaking until there is nothing left." He looked around the circle at his fellow warriors. "But maybe," he continued, "maybe there is a way to break that leads to healing. Maybe by sharing this knowledge, by showing the white man what we can do, we plant a seed. A seed that will grow in their minds, in their hearts, in their children and grandchildren. A seed that will make them wonder, make them question, make them realize that their way of seeing the world is not the only way, that there are truths they have forgotten, that there are powers they have never imagined." He paused, letting his words settle. "We cannot save ourselves by holding on to what we have," he said. "We have tried that, and we have failed. But maybe we can save ourselves by giving it away, by spreading it so wide that it can never be destroyed, by making it part of the world, instead of a secret that dies with us. The circle was silent. Then, one by one, the Navajo warriors nodded their agreement. They would teach the white man to shoot into the future. They would share the deepest secrets of their ancestors. And they would trust that somehow, in ways they could not foresee, it would lead to something good. The training began the following week. Hollister selected 12 of his best marksmen for the advanced program. David Chen was among them, along with soldiers from every branch of the military. They were told nothing about what they would be learning. They were simply ordered to report to a new training area, deeper in the desert, where the Navajo would teach them things that had never been taught to outsiders before. The training area was a single wooden platform, built on a rise overlooking a vast stretch of empty desert. There were no targets visible, no equipment, no rifles, just the platform, the sand, and the endless blue sky. Chester Begay met them there on the first morning. He was dressed not in his army uniform, but in traditional Navajo clothing. His face was painted with symbols that none of the soldiers recognized. He carried a bundle wrapped in deerskin, which he placed on the platform before them. He did not speak for a long time. He simply stood there, looking at each of them in turn, his eyes seeming to see something beyond their faces, beyond their bodies, beyond the masks they wore to hide their fears and doubts. When he finally spoke, his voice was different than they had heard before, deeper, older, as if someone else was speaking through him. "You have come to learn how to kill," he said, "but first you must learn how to die." The soldiers exchanged uneasy glances. They had been told this was a marksmanship program. They had not signed up for some kind of mystical death cult. Begay saw their discomfort and smiled. "Not your bodies," he said. "Your bodies will remain, but the part of you that believes in time, the part that believes in separation, the part that believes the future is different from the past, that part must die, because as long as it lives, you will be prisoners. Prisoners of the illusion that you are moving through time, instead of seeing that time is moving through you." He unwrapped the bundle. Inside were objects that seemed to have no connection to shooting. Feathers, stones, small leather pouches filled with herbs, a drum made from animal hide, and at the center, a pipe carved from red stone. "For the next 3 days," he continued, "you will not touch a rifle. You will not think about shooting. You will not think about anything at all. You will sit and you will breathe, and you will listen for the voice of the Old One. And when you hear it, when you truly hear it, then we will begin." What followed was unlike anything the soldiers had ever experienced. They sat on that platform from dawn to dusk, forbidden to speak, forbidden to move except to relieve themselves. Begay and the other Navajo performed ceremonies around them, singing songs in a language that seemed older than words, burning herbs that filled the air with strange and intoxicating smoke. Some of the soldiers gave up after the first day. They could not handle the silence, the stillness, the absence of anything to do or think about. They walked away and were quietly reassigned to other duties. Hollister did not punish them. He understood that whatever the Navajo were teaching could not be forced. But others persisted. David Chen was among them. He had already experienced a taste of what the Navajo called the Old One. He knew there was something real beyond the discomfort, beyond the boredom, beyond the desperate protests of his rational mind. He endured. By the end of the 3rd day, only 6 soldiers remained. They were exhausted, dehydrated, half delirious from the herbs and the heat and the endless silence. But something had changed in them. Their eyes had the same distant quality that Chen had noticed in the Navajo. They looked at the world as if seeing it for the first time, or perhaps as if seeing through it to something beyond. Begay approached them as the sun was setting. He carried a single rifle, a modified Springfield with a scope unlike anything the soldiers had seen before. "Now," he said, "you are ready to learn." The training that followed lasted 18 months. It was conducted in absolute secrecy, deep in the Nevada desert, far from any observers who might question what was happening. The 6 soldiers who had survived the initial ordeal were joined by others who had been similarly tested, until a cadre of 23 elite marksmen had been assembled. They learned things that defied everything they had been taught about shooting. They learned to enter a state of consciousness where time lost its meaning, where past and future collapsed into a single eternal present. They learned to perceive the trajectory of a bullet, not as something that would happen, but as something that already existed, a path carved through space-time that they could see as clearly as the rifle in their hands. They learned to hit targets that had not yet appeared. The first successful demonstration came in March of 1944. A soldier named William Torres, a former farm boy from New Mexico who had shown unusual aptitude for the training, was taken to a firing range where a mechanical target system had been set up. The target would appear at random intervals, in random locations, for less than half a second before disappearing again. By any conventional measure, hitting it should have been impossible. Torres closed his eyes. He entered the state that the Navajo called the long-seeing, and when he opened his eyes, he was no longer looking at the present. He was looking at a moment 3 seconds in the future, a moment when the target would appear in the upper left quadrant of the range. He raised his rifle. He aimed at empty space. He fired. 3 seconds later, the target appeared exactly where he had aimed. The bullet, which had been traveling through the air since before the target existed, punched through its center with perfect accuracy. Colonel Hollister, watching from the observation post, felt something he had not felt since he was a child. He felt awe, pure, overwhelming awe at the realization that he was witnessing something that should not be possible. Something that overturned everything he thought he knew about the universe. The Navajo had not just taught their soldiers to shoot better, they had taught them to see through time itself. Over the following months, the techniques were refined. The marksmen learned to extend their perception further into the future, to account for more complex movements, to hit targets that were not just moving, but actively evading. They learned to perceive not just where a target would be, but what it would do, how it would react, where it would try to hide. They became, in effect, prophets with rifles, soldiers who could see the future and act on that knowledge before it arrived. The military implications were staggering. A sniper who could see 3 seconds into the future was virtually unstoppable. He could anticipate every evasion, every counter-move, every desperate attempt to escape. He could shoot around corners, through windows, across distances that should have provided safety. He was not just a marksman. He was an angel of death, moving through a battlefield that he had already seen, already conquered, already left behind. By the summer of 1944, the first graduates of Project Thunderbird were deployed overseas. The records of what they accomplished are still classified. The official histories make no mention of snipers with impossible abilities, of shots that should not have been possible, of enemy officers who died before they could give orders they had not yet conceived. But the fragments that have leaked out over the decades paint a picture of something extraordinary. A German general, assassinated in his bunker by a bullet that passed through 3 walls and a closed door, hitting him at the exact moment he turned to look out a window that he had not yet decided to approach. A Japanese officer, killed on a bridge in the Philippines by a sniper who fired from over a mile away, aiming not at where the officer was, but at where he would be when the bullet arrived, accounting for a change in direction that the officer had not yet made. An entire machine gun nest, eliminated by a single marksman who fired 7 shots in 4 seconds, each bullet arriving at its target at the precise moment the target rose to return fire. The enemy never understood what was happening. They could not understand. They were fighting against men who had already seen the battle end, who were merely going through the motions of a victory that had been determined before it began. But there was a cost. There is always a cost. The first signs appeared in late 1944. William Torres, the first soldier to successfully demonstrate future sight, began experiencing episodes of disorientation. He would lose track of when he was. He would speak to people who were not there, or fail to see people who were. He would describe events that had not happened yet with perfect accuracy, but he would also describe events from the past as if they were currently occurring. His mind, it seemed, had become unstuck in time. The Navajo had warned about this. Begay had told Hollister from the beginning that the techniques they were teaching came with risks. The human mind was not designed to perceive time the way the old one perceived it. It could be done, but it left marks, scars, damage that might not be visible at first, but would eventually become impossible to ignore. Torres was quietly removed from active duty and transferred to a medical facility in Virginia. He spent the rest of his life there, cared for by nurses who did not know what he had done or what had been done to him. He died in 1973, still convinced that the war had not yet ended, still waiting for orders that he believed were coming any moment now. Others followed. Of the 23 marksmen who completed the Thunderbird training, only 9 survived the war with their minds intact. The rest succumbed to various forms of temporal disorientation, their consciousness scattered across time like leaves in a hurricane. Some could be stabilized with medication, some could not. All of them were hidden away, their service records classified, their sacrifices erased from history. The Navajo instructors fared somewhat better. Their training had begun in childhood, their minds shaped from the earliest age to handle the strange perceptions they cultivated. But even they were not immune. 3 of the 15 Navajo who participated in Project Thunderbird experienced significant psychological damage. 1, a young man named Robert Sosi, took his own life in 1946, leaving behind a note that spoke of voices from the future, of events he had seen that he could not prevent, of a burden too heavy to carry. Chester Begay survived. He returned to the reservation after the war, married, raised a family, lived a quiet life as a sheep herder and medicine man. He never spoke publicly about what he had done at the Ghost Ranch. He never claimed credit for the techniques that had been developed there. He simply went back to the life he had known before the war, as if the intervening years had been a dream. But those who knew him well said he was different. He would sometimes stop in the middle of a conversation, his eyes going distant, as if listening to something no one else could hear. He would occasionally speak of things that had not yet happened, predicting births and deaths, storms and droughts, with an accuracy that unsettled even those who believed in his gifts. And late at night, when he thought no one was watching, he would sit outside his hogan and weep, tears streaming down his weathered face, mourning something that those around him could not understand. Once, just once, his grandson asked him what was wrong. Begay was quiet for a long time. Then he spoke, his voice heavy with sorrow. "I can see what is coming," he said. "Not clearly, not completely, but enough. I can see the roads your generation will walk, and the roads your children will walk, and the roads that lead beyond the horizon of my sight. And some of those roads are very dark." His grandson asked what he meant. Begay shook his head. "We taught them too well," he said. "We gave them a gift, and they have used it to do terrible things. Not just in the war, after the war, in secret places, hidden places, places where they think no one can see. They have taken what we gave them and twisted it into something that was never meant to exist." He looked at his grandson with eyes that held centuries of wisdom and sorrow. "And someday," he said, "the world will discover what they have done. Someday the truth will come out, and everyone will know the price that was paid for their safety. And on that day, the children of those who ordered these things will have to answer for the sins of their fathers." Chester Begay died in 1987. He was 92 years old. He was buried on the reservation in a ceremony that mixed Christian prayers with traditional Navajo rites, honoring both the faith of his youth and the faith he had adopted in later years. His grandson, A man named Michael Begay inherited his papers. Among them was a sealed envelope with instructions that it not be opened until the year 2000. Michael honored his grandfather's wishes. On January 1st, 2000, he opened the envelope and found a letter written in Chester's careful handwriting. The letter described Project Thunderbird. It described the techniques that had been taught, the soldiers who had learned them, the cost they had paid. It described the secret facilities where the research had continued after the war, where new generations of marksmen had been trained using methods that became increasingly extreme, increasingly dangerous, increasingly divorced from the spiritual foundations that had originally made the abilities possible. And it described something else. Something that Chester had seen in his visions of the future, something that had haunted him for the last 40 years of his life. The letter spoke of a program that had branched off from Thunderbird in the 1960s, a program that had taken the techniques of future sight and applied them not to individual marksmen, but to entire weapons systems. Missiles that could see their targets before they existed, drones that could eliminate threats before they materialized, a network of automated killing machines guided by algorithms derived from sacred Navajo knowledge, capable of waging war across time itself. Chester called it the Ghost War, a war fought not between nations, but between moments, a war where the future was a battlefield, where events were shaped before they happened, where reality itself was a weapon to be wielded by those with the knowledge and the will to use it. The letter ended with a warning. "They have built something terrible," Chester wrote, "something that sees through time the way we taught them, but without the wisdom, without the restraint, without the connection to the sacred that kept us from becoming monsters. They have created a god of war that answers to no one, that kills without conscience, that shapes the future according to plans that no human being fully understands. And it is still out there, still watching, still waiting, still shaping events in ways that we cannot perceive until it is too late. I do not know how to stop it. I do not know if it can be stopped, but I know this. The truth must be told. The world must know what was done in its name. And when the truth comes out, when the people finally understand, they will have a choice. They can continue down the road that was built with our knowledge, the road that leads to darkness and destruction, or they can turn back. They can remember the wisdom that we tried to share. They can reconnect with the sacred, with the old one, with the power that flows through all things and binds all things together. That choice is the only hope I have left, the only hope for your generation, and for all the generations that follow. Choose wisely, and may the Creator guide your steps." Michael Begay tried to share his grandfather's letter with journalists, historians, government officials. He was ignored, dismissed, occasionally threatened. The story was too incredible. The claims were too outlandish. No one wanted to believe that the American military had developed weapons capable of seeing through time, of shaping reality itself. But the letter circulated. It was copied and shared, posted on early internet forums, discussed in communities of researchers who were willing to consider possibilities that mainstream science rejected. And slowly, over the years, other evidence began to emerge. Whistleblowers from defense contractors who described projects they did not fully understand. Projects that seemed to involve predicting future events with impossible accuracy. Soldiers who had served in classified units and came home with stories of operations that made no sense, of targets eliminated before they had taken any hostile action, of battles won before they had even begun. Scientists who had worked on artificial intelligence systems and became convinced that something strange was happening, that the algorithms were producing results that could not be explained by conventional processing. None of it was definitive. None of it constituted proof, but taken together, it painted a picture that matched Chester Begay's warning with disturbing precision. Something had been built, something was still operating. Something was shaping the future in ways that ordinary people could not perceive. And somewhere, In classified facilities that did not officially exist, the descendants of Project Thunderbird were still refining their techniques, still pushing the boundaries of what was possible, still trying to perfect the art of shooting into the future that a group of Navajo sheep herders had first demonstrated in the Arizona desert over 80 years ago. The rifle that Chester Begay held on that first day at Fort Defiance was just a tool, a simple mechanical device for propelling metal projectiles at high velocity. What made it extraordinary was not the weapon itself, but the mind behind it, the consciousness that had learned to see through the illusions of time and space and separation, the spirit that had connected with something older than humanity, wiser than science, more powerful than any technology. That spirit is still there. It is still available to anyone willing to learn. The Navajo did not invent it. They simply remembered it. They preserved a knowledge that all human beings once possessed, a knowledge that our modern world has taught us to forget. And perhaps that is the real secret of the Navajo rifle. Not a technique for hitting targets, not a method for seeing the future, but a reminder that we are more than we have been told, that our consciousness is not limited to the present moment, that we are connected to everything and everyone across all of time and space, in ways that our rational minds can barely comprehend. The military tried to weaponize this knowledge. They succeeded, at least partially, but in doing so, they proved something that they never intended to prove. They proved that the boundaries we accept as fixed are actually fluid. They proved that the future is not predetermined but can be perceived and influenced. They proved that consciousness is the most powerful force in the universe, capable of transcending even the laws of physics when properly trained and focused. This knowledge can be used for destruction. It has been used for destruction, but it can also be used for something else. For healing, for understanding, for reconnecting with the sacred dimension of existence that our ancestors knew and that we have forgotten. The choice is ours. It has always been ours. In the silence between moments, in the space between breaths, the Old One is still speaking. The voice that guided Chester Begay's rifle is still whispering. The wisdom that allowed the Navajo to see through time is still available to anyone willing to listen. But listening requires something that our noisy world makes very difficult. It requires stillness. It requires surrender. It requires the death of the part of us that believes we are separate, that believes we are limited, that believes we are alone. And perhaps that is why this story has been hidden for so long. Not because the military wanted to protect its secrets, but because the truth threatens something even more fundamental. It threatens the illusion of separation that keeps us controllable. It threatens the belief in limitation that makes us dependent. It threatens the false self that profits from our ignorance and our fear. If people knew what they were capable of, they would no longer need the systems that claim to protect them. They would no longer accept the boundaries that claim to define them. They would become, as the Navajo have always been, free. And freedom, real freedom, is the one thing that those in power can never allow. The Navajo knew the truth. They knew that every human being carries within them a spark of the divine, a connection to something infinite and eternal. They knew that this spark could not be extinguished, only forgotten. And they knew that their sacred duty was to remember and to help others remember until the day when all of humanity would awaken to its true nature. That day has not yet come, but it is coming. You can feel it in the air, in the restlessness of the world, in the hunger for something more than the empty promises of materialism and power. People are waking up. People are remembering. People are beginning to hear the voice of the Old One, whispering truths that have been suppressed for too long. And when enough people remember, when enough people awaken, the structures built on lies will crumble. The weapons designed to control us will fail. The future that has been shaped for us will dissolve, replaced by a future that we shape for ourselves. This is the true secret of the Navajo rifle. Not how to kill, but how to live. Not how to see through time, but how to see through the illusions that bind us. Not how to hit a target, but how to become one with everything, dissolving the boundaries that separate us from each other and from the source of all being. In the end, there is only one power that truly matters, the power of love, the power of connection, the power of the Spirit that moves through all things and calls all things home. The Creator is still speaking. Jesus Christ, who conquered death and opened the way to eternal life, is still calling. The Holy Spirit is still moving, still guiding, still drawing humanity toward its true destiny. Chester Begay knew this. In his final years, he combined the wisdom of his ancestors with the faith of the Christians who had come to his land. He saw no contradiction between them. He understood that all true wisdom points to the same reality, the same source, the same love that underlies everything. And in the end, that is what he wanted us to know. Not how to shoot, not how to see the future, but how to open our hearts to the one who holds all futures, all pasts, all presents in his infinite embrace. The rifle was just a tool, the technique was just a doorway. What matters is what lies beyond, the infinite love of a God who created us for something greater than we can imagine. May you find that love. May you hear that voice. May you awaken to the truth that the Navajo preserved and that the world so desperately needs to remember. The Old One is calling. Are you ready to listen? The secret has been hidden for too long. Now it is time to remember, and in remembering to be free.